there are certainly types of states that are available to you that are much bigger than you might suspect at any given moment. And the interesting thing about Big Mind is it's one of a series of states that human beings are said to have, in a sense, ever-present access to. And Big Mind, in a sense, is sort of the most important, let's put it that way. It's ever-present consciousness, it's Godhead, it's Tao, it's the abyss, it's the unqualifiable suchness of this in every moment. And as we were saying the last time we were together, one of the interesting things about it is it's really sort of the only thing you've ever really deeply known. All the other phenomena have changed. We were saying, you can remember that you were around last week. You were doing something last week, right? Yes. Everybody, yeah, I remember last week. What? You don't know. All you know is that I am was there. And that fundamental ever-present I amness is that fundamental condition upon which everything arises, including your own finite self. So having that ever-present condition, getting a little glimpse of that, getting a taste of that pointed out, is a very, very profound kind of reorientation and remembrance of this fundamental birthright that belongs to literally every sentient being. So that's a few of you that didn't get it, you're going to go, well, I want to take that class again. We'll come back and keep working with it. And it's something that we'll continue to clarify. And there are many, many different paths to this. One of the reasons we like working with Genpo and Diane and John Kessler and some of the people that are working with that process is that it is a relatively quick and straightforward introduction to your original face. The traditions maintain that there are several states of consciousness that are indeed ever-present. You have access to a human being, now we're talking, not sentient beings. All sentient beings have Buddha mind, or Godhead, or spark of absolute spirit. That's the definition of being a sentient being, being an individual holon, all the way down. Quarks, atoms, Republicans, all have a spark of that awareness. Is proof of God's greatness, if ever there was one. Now we of course love Democrats and Republicans because we are integral. I have to explain that. What we want to talk about though a little bit is the difference between states and stages. States of consciousness and stages of consciousness. And we're going to find in particular there are at least two different kinds of stages. The first kind of stages are found throughout all of the meditative traditions. You can find them in St. Teresa of Avila when she talks about the 7 interior castles and then defines these 7 stages of experience that she has. You can find them in the contemplative texts the world over. There's another kind of stage that is really a discovery of the modern West. You find it literally no place in any tradition except starting about 100 to 200 years ago, a certain kind of research that is one of the West's great contribution to psychology. And these are the stages that have indeed been investigated by people like Jane Lovinger and Claire Graves and Abe Maslow and Piaget and so on. We'll come back and talk about those. Those kinds of stages, there are many different aspects to them, but a part of them are intersubjective. And so they don't show up in meditation or contemplation. You can sit on a Zen mat for 20 years, and you will never see a thought that says, this is a moral stage 3 thought, and this is a moral stage 4 thought. Oh, there goes a yellow thought. Oh, there goes a red thought. It's just not going to happen. Those stages have to be discovered by a particular type of inquiry. And it's kind of research. Once they're discovered, you can look at your own mind and go, well, by gosh, I can see that these kinds of things do indeed tend to exist. So it's a real crucial issue for any form of integral psychology and especially integral psychotherapy that we take into account states and both kinds of stages. Because you won't get both kinds of stages in any tradition that's out there. So every tradition out there up to this point is not quite integral. And so that's one of the things we want to take into account. So I'll come back and circle back or talk a little bit about these in a little bit more detail. But I wanted to set that up a little bit. And I'll talk just a few more minutes about states and these two kinds of stages, and then we'll zero in on some of these particular issues. The general notion of states and stages, you find that model going all the way back as early as Vedanta and Vajrayane. And it's one of the really great, the Vedanta, the simple Vedanta model is one of the really primordial, absolutely best, small, succinct psychological models you can find. And Vajrayane agrees with it. The Vedanta model is very simple. It has 5 levels or stages called the sheaths. It has 3 states, and it has 3 bodies, or 3 energies. And with those simple 3 little variables, you can cover about 90% of what you really need to cover in a lot of these things. So the stages, the 5 stages, the sheaths covering Atman or Brahman are literally like the levels of consciousness, or the stages that we would look at, some of the types of stages we would look at. And it goes from the Annamaya Kosha to the Pranamaya Kosha to the Manomaya Kosha to the Vijnanamaya Kosha to the Anandamaya Kosha. That basically means that from food to emotional sexual energy to early mind to higher mind and then to transpersonal bliss mind. Those are conceived as sheaths around your own self. So that big mind that you were introduced to, one of the reasons that you don't always remember it is that there are these 5 sort of layers over it, and you start paying attention to something that's going on in one of those 5 layers, then all of a sudden you forget ever present. And that's okay. That's sort of how the game gets going. It's kind of fun. So those are the 5 levels or sheaths. And you can use the 7 chakras, are very similar, instead of the 5, and you get essentially the same thing. And you find those models present as well. Then they add 2 other components, though, to give 3 components altogether, and that's what makes it so interesting. One component is states of consciousness. The 5 sheaths are stages or structures of consciousness. The states of consciousness, and there are anywhere between 3 and 5 of those, are waking, dreaming, deep sleep. They then add 4th, Turiya, the ever-present witness, and there's a 5th, Turiyatita, which means one taste. So these states can have different stages in them. And they were smart enough to see that. They were smart enough to see that if you're in a dream state at night, you can actually have 2 or 3 of these levels operating, 2 or 3 stages operating. So that's a very, very profound insight. And then they add a 3rd component, which is even more profound. And that's that every mind has a body. So every state or stage of consciousness has an energy associated with it, an energetic component. And they call it either prana, or they sometimes call it bodies. They sometimes call it wind. The Tibetans call it wind, lung, R-L-U-N-G. But so the idea is that the waking state must have a body to support it, the waking state mind, and it does. It has a gross body. And then if you're in a dream state, or in a bardo, or in a meditative state, you're in a subtle state, it has to have a body, and that's the subtle body. It's an actual energy that supports that consciousness. And even in the causal, deep, formless sleep, there's a very, very subtle body. And the Tibetans actually call it gross, subtle, and very subtle. And Vedanta calls it gross, subtle, causal. And that's a causal body. It's a fine, fine, all-pervading energy or feeling. So you can actually have a whole series of feeling energy components going with the cognitive components. This is going to come back to what you're talking about. So it depends on just where you want to feel yourself in relation to the cosmos. So if you feel yourself in this physical body right here and right now, which is a good place to start, we don't want to forget that, then you're in the gross body, which is a nice thing to have on occasion, if it's not running a fever. Then it's that, but you actually feel yourself right there. Now if you move into a subtle body, it starts to get more interesting. Subtle body is something you have in the dream state, for example. In the dream state, a lot of very interesting things are happening. You can fly, you can move around. It's a very plastic, expandable condition. And in the bardo realm, if you are making that trip, the traditions that believe in that believe that this is the car you're driving in that journey. So the subtle body is what takes you from gross body to gross body in terms of reincarnation. And then, so you can feel the subtle body expand, and this is where we kind of live our energy. If you're feeling relaxed now, you can feel your subtle body kind of expand, include. We get very loving and very open, which is very, very nice. And then if somebody, like criticizes the integral model or something, and then, but I'm bigger than that. And Tong Lin is a way to move into other people's energetic bodies and exchange self for other, so that you can actually see how fluid it ultimately. Remember, all of these bodies are arising in big mind. They're all arising in that ever-present state that you've tasted. And it's just a matter of where you want to locate yourself in that cosmos of what's arising. Now the causal body, the subtle body, is this wonderful sort of accordion energy. And the causal body is in a sense, because it's very close to emptiness, it's very much like deep dreamless sleep and very much like formless meditation, but they maintain there is an energy there. And there is a sheath, Anandamaya Kosha, which is a very subtle sheath of bliss. So you can sort of, we were talking a little bit about how right on the outside of emptiness there's being, consciousness, bliss, or joy, or happiness. So emptiness has a faint edge of thrilling bliss. It's sort of one of the easy ways to sort of identify it, but you don't want to get caught up in dualistic notions about it and exclude other states. But the causal body, you can feel the causal body if you just feel that which is sort of all-pervading. And so you can feel that particularly on the out-breath. When you breathe in, you're sort of bringing down that causal body into your subtle and then physical body. But on the out-breath, and you can just feel it, it's all-pervading. It expands literally to infinity. You find that model going all the way back as early as Vedanta and Vajrayane. And it's one of the really great, the Vedanta, the simple Vedanta model is one of the really primordial, absolutely best, small, succinct psychological models you can find. And Vajrayane agrees with it. The Vedanta model is very